The kingdom of the Moon Fong Pak was a place of towering, ancient trees and mountains that scraped the sky. In the heart of this wild land stood a palace made of dark, gray stone, so large it seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself. And inside this giant, echoing palace lived a king who was just as large and just as lonely. His name was Lior, and he was the mega-size Alpha King. He was, to put it simply, the biggest werewolf anyone had ever seen. When he walked through the grand hallways, his footsteps were like soft drums, and his shadow stretched for miles, darkening the torches on the walls. His shoulders were broader than any doorframe, and his presence was like a physical weight in the air. Because of this, a deep and heavy silence had fallen over the palace, a silence born from fear. You see, a king needs a queen. A werewolf alpha, especially one as powerful as Lior, needs a mate. A mate is a partner, a best friend, the one person who can calm the fierce wolf spirit inside him and help him rule with both strength and kindness. But for King Lior, finding a mate seemed impossible. Every woman in the pack, from the strongest warrior to the most graceful hunter, was terrified of him. It wasn't that he was cruel. He had never raised his voice in anger. It was his sheer size, the immense power that rolled off him in waves. They feared being crushed by a simple hug, or that his deep, rumbling voice would shake them apart. So, whenever he passed, they would all immediately lower their heads, study the floor with great interest, and hold their breath until his long shadow had passed over them and disappeared down the hall. He was the most powerful being in the world, and he was utterly, completely alone. Far from the cold stone of the palace, down in the sun-drenched meadows at the edge of the pack lands, was a world of color and life. This was Thalia's world. Thalia was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack. Omegas were meant to cook and clean and stay out of the way. But Thalia had a special gift. She had a small, hidden garden, a secret spot between the roots of a giant oak tree where the sunlight danced through the leaves. Here she didn't see herself as lowly. Here she was a healer. She knew every plant by name, which leaves could mend a deep cut, which flowers could cool a fever, which roots could soothe a troubled mind. Her hands, though small, were clever and gentle. While others in the pack showed their strength with claws and teeth, Thalia's strength was in her quiet patience and her vast, caring heart. One afternoon, as she was grinding some lavender to help a young pup sleep, she heard the distant, mournful howl of the Alpha King. It wasn't a sound of command but one of deep, profound sadness, a sound that echoed through the valleys and made everyone pause for a moment. Thalia looked up from her work, her eyes soft. She had seen the king from a distance many times, a massive, solitary figure standing on his high balcony. The others saw a giant, a monster, a king to be feared. But Thalia, with her healer's heart, saw something else. She saw the slump of his shoulders. She saw the way he looked out over his bustling, lively pack with a look of longing. She saw not a terrifying beast, but a terribly lonely man, trapped by his own greatness. The next day a summons echoed through the entire pack. Everyone, from the highest-ranking warriors to the lowest Omegas, was to gather in the main courtyard of the stone palace. A nervous energy buzzed in the air. What was wrong? Was there a war? Thalia, curious, joined the very back of the crowd, hiding slightly behind a large stone pillar. King Lior walked out onto the high balcony, and a hush fell so deep you could hear the leaves rustling a mile away. He stood there, his immense form blocking out the sun for those standing directly below him. He did not roar. He did not demand. He spoke, and his voice, though deep, was quiet and filled with a vulnerability no one had ever heard before. "My pack," he began, his words slow and careful. "I have called you here not for a battle, but for a question. A king cannot rule alone. My wolf spirit is restless. It needs the calm that only a true mate can bring. I will not force anyone. I am not that kind of king." He paused, his golden eyes scanning the sea of faces, all of whom quickly looked down. "I am asking, is there anyone here brave enough to simply try? To try and be my friend? To spend time with me, to talk with me? I promise you, on my honor as your alpha, no harm will come to you. I do not wish to be alone anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than any stone in his palace. It was a thick, uncomfortable silence. You could see the warriors shifting on their feet, the women nervously clutching their dresses. Minutes stretched on. No one moved. No one made a sound. Hope, which had briefly flickered in Lior's eyes, began to die, replaced by the familiar, weary sadness. His massive shoulders slumped, and he let out a soft sigh, ready to turn and walk back into the lonely darkness of his palace. It was then that a small movement came from the back of the crowd. A single figure stepped out from behind the stone pillar. It was Thalia. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so loudly she was sure the whole pack could hear it. Her legs felt like they were made of water. But she lifted her chin, took a deep breath and walked forward. The crowd parted for her, a wave of shocked whispers following her every step. An Omega? Was she crazy? Did she have a death wish? She walked until she was standing alone in the empty space directly below the king's balcony. She had to crane her neck all the way back to see him. And then she did the one thing no one had dared to do in years. She looked directly into his golden eyes. She did not look away in fear. She did not lower her head in submission. She met his gaze, and in her own eyes, he saw not terror but a gentle, unwavering courage. Her voice, though quiet, was clear and steady as it broke the crushing silence. I will try. 2 small words. But to Lior they were the most important words he had ever heard. He stared down at this small, brave girl, this Omega who smelled of earth and sunshine, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the lonely shadow in the palace felt a tiny, warm spark of light. The days that followed Thalia's brave declaration were filled with a tense and watchful silence from the rest of the Moonfang pack. Whispers trailed after her like ghosts as she went about her Omega duties, the pack members watching her with a mixture of pity, curiosity, and outright disbelief. They were all waiting, expecting at any moment to hear that the king had tired of his strange experiment, or that the little Omega had finally fled in terror. But neither of those things happened. Instead, a new, delicate routine began to form within the cold stone walls of the palace, a routine built on hesitant words and quiet discoveries. The first of their meetings was arranged for the following evening in the palace's main hall, a cavernous room with a fireplace so large a man could stand upright inside it. Thalia arrived, her simple dress feeling very plain against the grand tapestries, to find Lior already waiting. He was trying to make himself look smaller, sitting on a large fur rug by the fire, but his presence still filled the entire space. An awkward silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Lior, so used to giving commands, found he had no words. Thalia, who was used to being silent and unseen, found she had to be the brave one once more. "Do you like the rain, your majesty?" she asked, her voice a soft counterpoint to the crackling fire. The question was so simple, so ordinary, that it took Lior completely by surprise. He was prepared for questions about battle strategies or pack law. Not the weather. He blinked his golden eyes. "The rain?" he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," Thalia said, venturing a little closer. "I like the sound it makes on the leaves in my garden. It's a peaceful sound." Lior was silent for a long moment, considering. I do not often stand in the rain," he admitted. "My guards worry it seems undignified for a king." There was a hint of something in his voice then, not sadness but a faint frustration. It was the first small crack in his royal armor, and Thalia noticed it. Their next meeting was a walk through the palace grounds at dusk. Lior pointed out the different types of trees, his knowledge surprisingly detailed. Thalia, in turn, pointed out the birds that nested in them and the little animals that scurried in the undergrowth, things his large, commanding presence usually scared away. They were 2 people showing each other their separate worlds, piece by piece. He learned she had a younger brother she cared for. She learned his favorite food was wild berries, a simple pleasure he rarely indulged. It was during their 3rd meeting that Thalia decided to share her most precious secret. She led him away from the manicured paths of the palace gardens, down a small, almost invisible trail that wound through a thicket of hawthorn bushes. "I have a place I'd like to show you," she said, a note of shy excitement in her voice. "If you'd like to see it." The trail opened up into a small, sun-drenched clearing nestled in the protective roots of an ancient oak tree. This was Thalia's garden. It was not a neat, orderly place. It was a beautiful chaos of color and scent. Purple lavender buzzed with bees, bright yellow sunflowers stood tall, and clusters of tiny blue forget-me-nots dotted the green like fallen pieces of the sky. The air was thick with the smell of earth and blooming things. Lior stopped at the edge of the clearing, his large frame seeming out of place among the delicate flowers. He looked around, a strange expression on his face. "You made this?" he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I tend to it," Thalia corrected gently, kneeling down to touch the petals of a calendula plant. "This one is for healing cuts. And this mint here is for settling an upset stomach." She began to walk him through her garden, showing him each plant and its purpose. She spoke of the soil, the sunlight, the way the plants helped each other grow. It was a language of life and nurturing, a language Lior realized he knew nothing about. As she explained, she reached out to brush a small, crawling insect from the sleeve of his tunic. It was an instinctive, caring gesture. Her fingertips lightly grazed the skin of his forearm. A spark, warm and sharp and alive, jumped between their skin. Thalia pulled her hand back as if burned, her eyes wide. Lior's breath caught in his throat. The air in the little clearing suddenly felt charged as if before a storm. That single, accidental touch had been more powerful than any handshake or formal greeting. It was a jolt of pure connection, a recognition that resonated deep in their bones. It was the mate spark, the sign of a true, fated bond. Neither of them spoke of it, but the knowledge of it hung in the air between them, changing everything. Their conversations after that were different, softer. Their smiles came easier, their silences were comfortable instead of awkward. This new, fragile happiness, however, did not go unnoticed. A few of the pack warriors, particularly a proud and ambitious one named Cyrus, watched the growing friendship with a jealous scorn. To them, an Omega was unworthy of the king's attention, a stain on his royal dignity. They decided to remind Thalia of her place. One afternoon, as Thalia was carrying a basket of herbs back from the forest stream, Cyrus and two of his friends stepped onto the path, blocking her way. "Well, well," Cyrus sneered, looking down at her. "Look who it is. The king's new pet. Do you really think he cares about a little nobody like you? You're just a distraction." Thalia's heart began to pound, but she stood her ground, clutching her basket tightly. Before she could form a reply, a shadow fell over them. The air grew cold. They hadn't heard him approach. He moved with a silence that defied his size. Lior was there. He didn't snarl. He didn't shift. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply stepped up behind Thalia, his presence an immovable wall of quiet power. He looked at Cyrus, and his golden eyes held a fire that promised utter devastation. He didn't need to threaten. His very stance, the way he positioned himself slightly in front of Thalia, was a message more clear than any roar. Cyrus and his friends immediately dropped their eyes, their bravado vanishing. They mumbled apologies and scrambled back, disappearing quickly into the trees. Lior turned to Thalia. His gaze scanned her, checking for any sign of harm. The fierce protectiveness in his eyes took her breath away. When he spoke, his voice was low and firm, leaving no room for doubt. "No one," he said, each word a vow, "will ever disrespect you again." In that moment he wasn't just a lonely king making a friend. He was her protector. And she knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that she was falling in love with him. The air in Thalia's secret garden felt different on the night of the full moon. It was charged with a soft, silver magic that made every leaf and petal seem to glow from within. The world was bathed in a light that was both brilliant and gentle, and in this luminous stillness, the unspoken words that had been growing between Lior and Thalia finally demanded to be heard. He found her there, as he often did now, sitting among her herbs, her face turned up to the moon. He moved to sit beside her, the great oak tree seeming to bend its branches to shelter them. For a long time they were quiet, listening to the night sounds, but the silence between them was no longer empty, it was full, like a song waiting for its first note. Lior turned to her, and in the moonlight, his features, so often set in lines of stern authority, were soft. "Thalia," he began, his voice a low, heartfelt rumble. "Before you stepped forward, my world was shades of gray. It was duty and silence and the weight of this crown." He paused, his golden eyes searching hers. "My wolf spirit, the part of me that is wild and fierce, has not been calm in many years. It paced and growled inside me, a prisoner of its own power. But from the first moment you looked at me without fear, it grew quiet. It saw you not an Omega but the bravest, kindest heart it has ever known. It has chosen you. It tells me with a certainty deeper than any thought, that you are my true mate." He reached out, his large hand enveloping hers, and the warm, electric spark they had felt before now bloomed into a steady, comforting warmth that spread through their joined hands, a feeling of finally coming home. Tears welled in Thalia's eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. She squeezed his hand, her touch firm and sure. "And my heart has chosen you, Lior," she whispered. "Not the king, not the alpha, but the lonely man who loves wild berries and the sound of rain. I love you." Under the witness of the full moon, the symbol of their kind, they leaned in and shared their first true kiss. It was gentle and sweet, a promise sealed. It was the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, bonding their souls together in a way that was as ancient and natural as the forest itself. But the path to a happy ending is rarely without one final stone. The news of their bonding spread through the pack like wildfire, and while many were hopeful, others were scornful. A rival alpha, a brash and power-hungry wolf named Marcus from the neighboring Stone Claw pack, arrived at their borders. He had once hoped to form an alliance by offering his own sister to Lior, and he saw Thalia as an insult. He stood in the courtyard, his chest puffed out, and issued a challenge. An omega for a queen? He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Your pack grows weak, Lior. She cannot even defend herself, let less help you lead. This bond is a joke. I challenge its worth. A growl started deep in Lior's chest, his protective instincts flaring. He stepped forward, ready to defend his mate's honor with tooth and claw. But a small, firm hand on his arm stopped him. It was Thalia. She stepped forward, not with a snarl, but with a calm and steady gaze fixed on Marcus. A strong pack is not led by claws alone, Alpha Marcus, she said, her voice clear and carrying across the silent courtyard. It is led by wisdom. You challenge my strength? Then I challenge yours. I challenge you to a contest not of muscle but of mind. Let us debate the ancient pack laws. Let us solve a dispute that has troubled the elders. Let us see whose strength the pack truly needs more. Marcus was stunned into silence. He was a warrior. His arguments were won with force, not words. The pack watched, utterly captivated, as Thalia, the gentle Omega healer, proceeded to outmaneuver the brutish Alpha at every turn. She quoted old laws he had never heard of. She presented solutions to problems he didn't even understand. She proved, beyond any doubt, that the greatest strength was intelligence and a deep care for the well-being of every single pack member. Humiliated and outsmarted, Marcus could only grumble and retreat with his tail figuratively between his legs. Lior watched her, his heart swelling with a pride so immense it threatened to overwhelm him. She had not needed his protection. She had won her own battle and in doing so had won the respect of the entire pack. The mating ceremony that followed was the most beautiful the Moonfang pack had ever seen. It was not held in the cold stone palace, but in Thalia's sunlit garden, which was now overflowing with flowers from every member of the pack, a gift to their new queen. Lior stood, not as a terrifying giant, but as a man in love, his eyes only for Thalia. As they exchanged their vows, he placed a delicate silver necklace around her throat, from which hung a pendant shaped like a blooming flower. So you always carry a piece of your garden with you, he whispered. In return, Thalia gave him a small, finely woven pouch of herbs. To always keep your spirit calm, she said, her smile brighter than the sun, and to remind you of me, and of the day a simple hello changed everything. From that day on, King Lior and Queen Thalia ruled side by side. The palace was no longer a place of echoing silence, but a home filled with warmth and laughter. Lior's great size was no longer a thing of fear. For Thalia, it was a comfort, a safe place to rest her head. Together they created a pack where every wolf, from the strongest alpha to the smallest omega pup, was valued for their own unique gifts. Their love, which had started with a single brave step out of a crowd, had not only saved a lonely king but had healed an entire kingdom, building a legacy of kindness and courage that would be told for generations to come. If you were moved by the journey of Lior and Thalia, if you felt your heart soar when they found their happy beginning, then you won't want to miss the next story. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you more tales of epic love, brave hearts, and unforgettable romance. Subscribe now and join our pack of storytellers. Your next favorite adventure is just a click away.